I think we can do another chapter here, so I'm going to get started with the first chapter of The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. Let's go. Why are people? Intelligent life on a planet comes of age and... come on, stop. I can do this. Intelligent life on a planet comes... Intelligent life on a planet comes of age when it first works out the reason for its own existence. If superior creatures from space ever visit Earth, the first question they will ask in order to assess the level of our civilization is, have they discovered evolution yet? Living organisms have had existed on Earth without ever knowing why for over 3,000 million years before the truth finally dawned on one of them. His name was Charles Darwin. To be fair, others had inklings of the truth, but it was Darwin who first put together a coherent and tenable account of why we exist. Darwin made it possible for us to give a sensible answer to the curious child whose question heads this chapter. We no longer have to resort to superstition when faced with the deep problems. Is there a meaning to life? What are we for? What is man? After posing the last of these questions, the eminent zoologist G.G. Simpson put it thus: the point I want to make now is that all attempts to answer that question before 1859 are worthless, and that we will be better off if we ignore them completely. Nice. So today, the theory of evolution is about as much open to doubt as the theory that the Earth goes around the Sun, but the full implications of Darwin's evolution have yet to be widely realized. Zoology is still a minority subject in universities, and even those who choose to study it often make the decision without appreciating its profound philosophical significance. Philosophy and the subjects known as humanities are still taught almost as if Darwin had never lived. No doubt this will change in time. In any case, the book is not intended as a general advocacy of Darwinism. Instead, it will explore the consequences of the evolution theory for a particular issue. My purpose is to examine the biology of selfishness and altruism. Apart from its academic interest, the human importance of this subject is obvious. It touches every aspect of our social lives, our loving and hating, fighting and cooperating, giving and stealing, our greed and our generosity. These are claims that could have been made for Lorenz's on aggression, Audrey's The Social Contract, and Ibis Fell's Love and Hate. The trouble with these books is that their authors got it totally and utterly wrong. They got it wrong because they misunderstood how evolution works. They made the erroneous assumption that the important thing in evolution is the good of the species, rather than the good of the individual. It is ironic that Ashley Montagu should criticize Lorenz as a direct descendant of the nature read in Tooth and Claw, thinkers of the 19th century. As I understood Lorenz's view of evolution, he would be very much at one with Montagu in rejecting the implications of Tennyson's famous phrase. Unlike both of them, I think nature read in Tooth and Claw sums up our modern understanding of natural selection admirably. Before beginning on my argument itself, I want to explain briefly what sort of an argument it is and what sort of an argument it is not. If you were told that a man had lived a long and prosperous life in the world of Chicago gangsters, you would be entitled to make some guesses as to the sort of man he was. You might expect that he would have qualities such as toughness, a quick trigger finger, and the ability to attract loyal friends. These would not be infallible deductions, but you can make some inferences about a man's character if you know something about the conditions in which he has survived and prospered. The argument of this book is that we and all other animals are machines created by our genes. Like successful Chicago gangsters, our genes have survived, in some cases for millions of years in a highly competitive world. This entitles us to expect certain qualities in our genes. I shall argue that a predominant quality to be expected in a successful gene is ruthless selfishness. This gene selfishness will usually give rise to selfishness in individual behavior. However, as we shall see, there are special circumstances in which a gene can achieve its own selfish goals best by fostering a limited form of altruism at the level of individual animals. Special and limited are important words in the last sentence. Much as we might wish to believe otherwise, universal love and the welfare of the species as a whole are concepts that simply do not make evolutionary sense. Okay. This brings me to the first point I want to make about what this book is not. I'm not advocating a morality based on evolution. I'm saying how things have evolved. I'm not saying how we humans morally ought to behave. I stress this because I know I am in danger of being misunderstood by those people, all too numerous, who cannot distinguish a statement of belief in what is the case from an advocacy of what ought to be the case. My own feeling is that a human society based simply on the gene's law of universal ruthless Selfishness would be a very nasty society to live. Oh, this is a long chapter, but I'm gonna read it nonetheless. But unfortunately, however much we may deplore something, it does not stop it being true. This book is mainly intended to be interesting, but if you want to extract a moral chapter from it, there's no chapter in that. Moral from it. Read it as a warning. Be warned that if you wish, as I do, to build a society in which individuals cooperate generously and unselfishly towards a common good, you can expect little help from biological nature. Let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish. Let us understand what our own selfish genes are up to because we may then at least have the chance to upset their designs, something that no other species has ever aspired to. This is going haywire. As a corollary to these remarks about teaching, it's a fallacy, incidentally a very common one, to suppose that genetically inherited traits are by definition fixed and unmodifiable. Our genes may instruct us to be selfish, but we are not necessarily compelled to obey them all our lives. It may just be more difficult to learn altruism than it would be if we were genetically programmed to be altruistic. Among animals, man is uniquely dominated by nature, by culture, by influences learned and handed down. Some would say that culture is so important that genes, whether selfish or not, are virtually irrelevant to the understanding of human nature. Others would disagree. It all depends on where you stand in the debate over nature versus nurture as determinants of human attributes. This brings me to the second thing this book is not. It's not an advocacy of one position or another in the nature-nurture controversy. Naturally, I have an opinion on this, but I'm not going to express it except insofar as it is implicit in the view of culture that I shall rest present in the final chapter. If genes really turn out to be totally irrelevant to the determination of modern human behavior, if we really are unique among animals in this respect, it is, at the very least, still interesting to inquire about the rule to which we have so recently become the exception. And if our species is not so exceptional as we might like to think, it's even more important that we should study the rule. The third thing this book is not is a descriptive account of the detailed behavior of man or any other particular animal species. I shall use factual details only as illustrative examples. I shall not be saying, if you look at the behavior of baboons, you'll find it to be selfish. Therefore, the chances are that human behavior is selfish also. The logic of my Chicago gangster argument is quite different. It is this: humans and baboons have evolved by natural selection. If you look at the way natural selection works, it seems to follow that anything that is evolved by natural selection should be selfish. Therefore, we must expect that when we go and look at the behavior of baboons, humans, and all the living creatures, we shall find it to be selfish. If we find that our expectation is wrong, if we observe that human behavior is truly altruistic, then we shall be faced with something puzzling, something that needs explaining. Before going any further, we need the definition. An entity such as a baboon is said to be altruistic even if it behaves in such a way as to increase another such entity's welfare at the expense of its own. Selfish behavior has exactly the opposite effect. Welfare is defined as chances of survival, even if the effect on actual life and death prospects is so small as to seem negligible. One of the surprising consequences of the modern version of the Darwinian theory is that apparently trivial tiny influences on survival probability can have a major impact on evolution. This is because of the enormous time available for such influences to make themselves felt. It's important to realize that the above definitions of altruism and selfishness are behavioral, not subjective. I'm not concerned here with the psychology of motives. I'm not going to argue that about whether people who behave altruistically are really doing it for secret or subconscious selfish motives. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, and maybe we never know, but in any case, that's not what this book is about. My definition is concerned only with whether the effect of an act is to lower or raise the survival prospects of the presumed altruist and the survival prospects of the presumed beneficiary. It's a very complicated business to demonstrate the effects of behavior on long-term survival prospects. In practice, when we apply the definition to real behavior, we must qualify it with the word apparently. An apparently altruistic act is one that looks superficially as if it must tend to make the altruist more likely to die and the recipient more likely to survive. It often turns out on closer inspection that acts of apparent altruism are really selfishness in disguise. Once again, I do not mean that underlying motives are secretly selfish, but that the real effects of the act on survival prospects are the reverse of what we originally thought. I'm going to give some examples of apparently selfish and apparently altruistic behavior. It's difficult to suppress subjective habits of thought when we're dealing with our own species, so I should choose examples from other animals instead. First, some miscellaneous examples of selfish behavior by individual animals. Okay, I'm going to stop this chapter here. I think I'm going to actually do some studying. So we'll be back with part 2 of chapter 1.